Welcome in to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast, the official podcast of your New Orleans Pelicans. A podcast dedicated to everything you need to know about the squad. Hear from players, coaches, broadcasters, and those who cover the NBA on a daily basis. It's time to flock up. The New Orleans Pelicans Podcast starts right now.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast, the official podcast of your New Orleans Pelicans. As always, appreciate you for giving us a listen. At least Jim Eichenhofer does from New Orleans Pelicans.com. That's for sure. It makes his day.
Very much so. I appreciate all of the listeners out there. We love you.
So we continue our player profiles, and we go and take a look back at the sophomore season for Dyson Daniels and what it was like. First, let's just hear what he thought the season was like in his words.
This season was, a lot of ups and downs, a lot of good moments, a lot of could have moments, but I think overall, we took a step forward from last season, which is what you want to do every season. You want to get better, so we did that this year. We had a great record. Obviously, we made the play-in, which we would have liked to get a spot in the playoffs straight away. But we fought our way through the play-in and made it to the playoffs. And it was tough from there. We played a really good OKC team, a very well drilled team that plays together, plays the right way, and they got the best of us. But I think that adds a lot of motivation for us next year. So like I said, you want to improve every year. So we improved this year. So I'd say it's a successful season for sure. And next year we want to do even better.
Jim, I'll ask you, what do you think of when you think of Dyson's sophomore year?
Yeah, it was similar to the clip that we just heard where, there was definitely some positives and there was some negatives as well. It was up and down. But I think for him specifically, that part of it was very related to his injury. He had an ankle injury in early February that kind of derailed him for a while, put him out, sidelined him for 20 or so games, and that was tough. I do think that he was making progress in the first couple months of the season, but then, as was the case when he was a rookie, the injury definitely was a setback, and he came back, and he looked a lot like the player that he had been early in the season, but I do think that it impacted him a little bit, and some of his aggressiveness decreased a little bit, and that's some of the things that we're going to get into with John DeShazier.
Yeah, Mr. John DeShazier back once again to give us a look-see at how Dyson Daniels' season went. Our player profiles continue with, once again, Mr. John DeShazier, analyst for the Pelicans Radio Network, as we now sit there and go down under and talk a little bit about Dyson Daniels. And what an interesting season, I guess it was for him. I called the Summer League games, saw this team wanting him to be more offensive, suffered through some injuries this year, and then at times you got to see some of that potential of what they like on the offensive and defensive end. But I don't know, John, when you look back at this season, what do you make of his sophomore year?
I thought it was a little uneven, but I will say this. Over the last 9 games after he came back from an injury, last 9 regular season games, he shot 40% from 3.
Yeah.
40% from 3, which is something that we have been, pining for Dyson Daniels to do, to look at the rim. And now he's not just looking at the rim, but he's making them. So he's got something to really build on, I think, confidence-wise. Now, he didn't play much or particularly well in the playoffs, but he's got some assets that people swoon over. He's a tall guy. Was he 6'8"?
Yeah.
He defends, and he doesn't just defend to be out there saying I'm playing defense. He defends with a purpose. He's quick on his feet. He understands position. He's got the long arms. He doesn't, we've talked about guys who don't respect opponents, who don't look at, the stat sheet and don't respect. He's a guy who doesn't have a lot of respect for opponents because he doesn't care who it is. Mm-hmm. He's going to guard a guy, and the guy's probably going to get ticked off with the way he guards him because he's going to be up on him. So he's that guy. And now, if he's making threes consistently, and he's never going to, I don't think he's going to be a 40% three-point shooter for his career, but if he's 36, 37, 35%, you can live with that. And he's got the little float game going, and he's a guy who gets out on the break. I'd love to see him attack the rim a little bit more in the open court because I think he's got those elements to him. So he's a really good piece to have on your team because we haven't seen, I don't think, nearly anything close to what he's going to be. We're seeing flashes of it. Now defensively, we're seeing a good portion of what he can be, what he is. He's a really good defender. He could be a borderline great defender. He's got that. But offensively is where it's got to be unlocked. And we saw a little bit of it coming off this season, and hopefully a little bit more growth next season as he gets more comfortable, because look, coaches and his teammates are begging him to shoot. They're begging him to shoot. And they're saying, look, we see the work you put in. We know you can make the shots. You made some in games. We need you to shoot, because if you're out there and you're not shooting, you're playing 4-on-5 on offense. That don't work. Not in today's NBA. So you got to make yourself an offensive threat. And I think he's on his way to doing that and doing it consistently. He's not a guy who needs to average 18 a game, but he can get up to, 12, 13. That's pretty good.
When you mention, coaches in a situation where they have to beg a player to shoot, I mean, I feel like that's definitely a rarity in basketball. Most of the guys that come into the league are like, how many shots can I get? And if I can get that, can I have more than that as well? So I think that it's interesting to, I don't want to put too much pressure on Dyson, but I think there's a lot of comparisons that you can make, kind of maybe rough comparisons between his first 2 seasons and Herb's first 2 seasons. And they also both came into the league with that hesitancy to shoot. I remember Trey Murphy has said multiple times that during that initial summer league, when both of those guys were rookies, it was like Herb didn't even really want to look at the basket at all. And you kind of had to do the same thing with him. But, you talk about Dyson's shooting and what you hope that he can progress to as far as percentage-wise 3-point shooting. Herb was 33%-ish his first 2 seasons from 3-point range. Dyson's been right almost exactly the same percentage, right around 31% in his first 2 years. So, how much of that do you think is going to factor in to, A, how successful long-term he's going to be in the NBA, and B, maybe how much his role can continue to expand? Because I do think that increased a little bit this year compared to his rookie year.
He's going to have to do it because he's got to be able to shoot it. He's got to be able to shoot it to survive in the NBA, because nobody in today's NBA can survive if you can't shoot it. That's just a fact. I remember when Pat Beverly couldn't shoot a lick. Now Pat Bev can make some threes. So Dyson's going to have to be able to do that. But if you look at him, it is, I think, totally upstairs. I think it's totally in the head. Because you look at his shooting form, his stroke, that looks fine. Looks fine.
Right.
So now he's got to get it into his head. I'm going to take the open shot when it's there. I'm going to take the open shot when it's there. He's just got to repeat that to himself on the chalkboard 100 times. I'm going to take the open shot when it's there, because he's got to get it into his mind. I have to be an offensive threat. I have to make my team more valuable. I have to make myself more valuable to my team by making these shots and forcing teams to guard me, because even now, we're going to go into the next season, I guarantee you, teams are going to look at Dyson Daniels and be like, all right, we'll give him a shot. You're going to have to prove it. Now you got to prove it. Now over the last 9 games, he shot 40% from 3. Can you do that in enough stretches in a season to make yourself a threat? Whereas Herb, we've seen it from Herb. Now Herb gets in that corner and people are like, okay, we got to scramble over here to get this guy, because he can make that shot. He couldn't make it at first, but now he's confident enough to where he's taking that shot and he's making enough of those shots to where we got to beware of that dude. So now Dyson's got to get to that position, because again, it's not the stroke. It's in the head. It's the confidence that he's got to build up.
Yeah, they've definitely spent a lot of time with him of kind of changing his form too. I think when he came in as a rookie, he had kind of a slower delivery, and I think he brought the ball up from lower, so it was kind of a longer process to fire it and get it off of his fingertips. But you're right, JD. I think we loved Tony Allen watching his career, but those type of players are kind of going away as far as the guys that you're playing 4-on-5 on the offensive end. Andre Robertson is another guy that I remember that was valuable for OKC, but he wasn't even really that old, and he got to the point where it was like, we can't play this guy because he's such a negative on the offensive end. So all of that stuff is super crucial. One of the things that I think I was a little bit surprised by when I looked back at Dyson's season, because you kind of think of, your recent memory almost is always the thing that stands out the most. But I had actually forgotten that he had played in the first 52 games of the regular season before he had that ankle injury against the Lakers. He hadn't missed any games. So you think back to the season, and just like his rookie year, he had an ankle injury that caused him to miss a big chunk of the season, and that stood out in my mind. But I kind of had forgotten about a little bit the progress that he made before that. What do you think are some of the things that you saw from him, maybe if it was incremental, in terms of some of the progress that he made over that stretch into kind of early February?
I thought we saw him attacking the rim a little bit more, not necessarily attacking the rim in terms of dunks, but once he got to the lane, looking at the rim and taking shots, which was a huge issue for me, because it was like, okay, you're 3 feet from the basket and you're wide open, and you're not looking at the rim. You've got to at least look at the rim. And I thought he started doing a little bit more of that. He's got that little funky floater that's like a knuckleball.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it's like his hands on the top of the ball before he was released, and it's like, how in the world does that go? But it goes. And so that's the biggest thing that I wanted to see from him, and that we saw increments from him where it was like, okay, you can't be the guy off the dribble and get to the lane and not look at the rim. You just can't do that. So now, hopefully, he'll get to the point where he's got the athleticism to where he will attack the rim completely and say, okay, I'm going up, and not only am I going to go up for the teardrop, but if I got an opening, I'm going to try to dunk it on a guy, because those are the things that make you a little bit more feared. And now when you drive, if you do those things, teams will look at you different, and they will compact the defense a little bit. And then when you kick it out, a guy's wide open for a three, okay, I can live with that. But when you're going in there and you're not looking at the rim at all, it's like, dude, you got to be a threat. You can't do that in today's NBA. You can't just drive in and not even look at the rim. You are doing yourself and your team a disservice. You got to make yourself available, and you got to make them think, at least, that you're going to score, you're going to finish.
I think what's happened a little bit, especially in the regular season, maybe this isn't as much the case in the playoffs, but the regular season has almost become like an arms race offensively. And I feel like having one or two negatives on the offensive end maybe 15 or 20 years ago wasn't as costly, because a lot of these games were finishing 88-86 and 79-74. But I mean, now that you have so many games where, I mean, the Pelicans averaged over 115 points a game, and it's that way almost across the entire league. So that's the part of it where it comes into play a lot more, that you have to have 5 threats on the court at all times. But one of the things that you mentioned earlier, JD, about Dyson was just his defense. The fact that we've seen him already become one of the better defensive players in the league. And another kind of comparison I make to Herb that I'm interested in watching for Dyson is, does he start to get the credit that, maybe not first team all defense that Herb has a chance to be and deserves, but just being recognized for what he does. I mean, for example, Dyson averaged 1.4 steals. He's in the top 15 in the NBA in steals per game, even though he only averaged 22 minutes. So I mean, it's incredible to think about the steals that he puts up in the role that he's in. But what do you think are are there other areas that he can continue to progress in defensively, or just keep getting better?
Well, the good thing is, and you don't see this with a lot of rookies, but we did see it with him and Herb. They came in like ready-made NBA defenders, which is phenomenal. But you don't see guys come in as ready-made NBA
That's
defenders.
That's a big-time outlier.
It takes time for guys to understand how to defend and the nuances of defending and positioning, and you don't get calls when you're young and those kinds of things. So he came in as a ready-made NBA defender, and I think he's going to get better with that, especially as he gains a little natural weight, and he's able to kind of keep guys from pushing him around a little bit. He kind of, I don't know if this is an adequate comparison, but I kind of feel like Matisse Thybulle when he came into the league, and he was just a defensive guy, and I guess Thybulle kind of still is just a defensive guy.
Right. But
he did his work in few minutes, and he made such an impact, and I think Dyson can do that now, depending on what happens with the Pelicans, because if David Griffin says, okay, we're going to make some drastic changes, and when people say, okay, well, do you want a lead guard, a traditional point guard? And he says, no, we just want guys who make good basketball decisions, who have high basketball IQs. Well, Dyson's a guy, I think, who has a pretty high basketball IQ. Mm-hmm. And when he plays the point, he looks like a fairly decent distributor. Now, he's going to, as we've said already, he's going to have to be able to score because he can't be on the floor in that role and just be a distributor. He's going to have to be able to score. And that's where his biggest jumps are going to come in scoring because he's already a really good NBA defender. And I think if he played enough, he could be an all defensive kind of guy.
Yeah.
I mean, because he gets his hands on enough balls. He comes up with enough steals. He comes up with enough blocks. He plays enough good one-on-one defense, and he plays really good help defense too. He and Herb are two of the smarter guys in terms of playing help defense. And I mean, in some possessions, you'll see those guys guard 2-3 guys on the rotations, and it's like, this is phenomenal. Right. He's one of those kinds of guys. So his biggest jumps are going to come on offense. He's just got to put the ball up more. He's got to have more confidence.
I think one thing, too, as we wrap up with Dyson Daniels, too, is you can't teach size. And I saw, you know this, Jim posts them all the time on his burner account. The lab videos, players love to have those lab videos out there.
I hate those.
I hear you. But at the same time, maybe this is why you feel that way. I'm watching a lab video of Dyson Daniels 2 weeks ago. And he's locking down corner threes. He's driving past people. He's going up. He's doing like a Jameis Winston workout. One of the guys has like a broomstick with the big old black pad on it. He's trying to whack him while he's going to the rim. And he's dunking. And he runs to the corner and he shoots a three. And the first thing I said in a Graf voice, where was that this year? But the reason I bring that up is not to kind of be like, well, where was that? But in terms of how often do we look at player development in terms of what you're being asked as well? You did bring up the team wants him to shoot it. So is that kind of part of a player's development of, hey, we want you to do this, so work on this? Is that maybe what the team asked him to work on? Corner threes, driving to the basket, things of that nature, because I think that's part of it too, right? I can go work on, quote unquote, my lab all I want. But if the team primarily sees me as a defender, or when my minutes are here, I'm here to be the point guard or the 3-point shooter. Again, I'm getting like, how much is it what the office over there asks?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure a lot of it is you sit down with a guy postseason and you say, okay, these were the weaknesses that we saw from you. So these are the things we want to see you work on. And my issue with guys in the lab, I mean, I get it, but I just think it's a little self-serving because you're out there working against, electricians and plumbers. You're not, it's not NBA caliber guys out there who are holding up the brooms. You need to go into a gym in an open run with NBA guys and work on your stuff there because that's the level of competition you're going to be playing against. And I think those guys who have the summer run in the NBA are probably some of the best runs in the history of basketball. Because those guys are out there. The stuff that they work on in private that they don't show you, that's the stuff they're working on in those runs. And so that's where, to me, you show it. You got to get out there and do it, at UCLA in the summer or wherever it is you play. But, yeah, they tell guys, look, we noticed that you don't shoot it so well from the right wing. So that's probably something that you need to shore up a little bit. Or we're noticing that, when you drive and you shoot, you're only shooting, 48%. We need to get that up to 62. So, you got to find out how to finish better. So from that standpoint, I don't mind guys being in the lab working at all. I just don't like the videos because it's like, dude, nobody cares about you, running over some one of your friends who's out there with a broom. We want to see you do it.
You're laughing, but I'm telling you, right after this, we're gonna go record a video with our Pels Video Digital Department of Jim running to the Pels facility. You're gonna be behind a vehicle or two, and you're gonna walk out with a broom and see. You're gonna have to duck Jim, make it over there. You got to get to the Pelicans facility in case practice is going on.
Writers should put out their own in the lab. We should have somebody screaming at us while we're trying to type. What right over our shoulder
on deadline?
Yeah, what is your lab? Is it your kid asking you to do something like I'm on deadline, I got to do something, or is it like you're sleepy or tired? What would be a in the lab moment for you, Jim?
I'd have to think about that because honestly, what I do isn't really that intense.
I got one easily because it happened this year, right? While we're talking. They were doing this construction.
Oh, construction while we're trying to do the podcast? Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Like
right when that was
a
happening?
serious test of your concentration, your ability to focus while there's like a jackhammer working in the background.
Well,
For John, it's easy. The planes leave, the buses leave. Like you have to get to the bus. If not, you're Ubering.
Yeah, but I mean, it's look, it's not nearly as like when I work for the Picayune Times Picayune, and so the Monday night game kick off at 7 or whatever. And our hard deadline for the columns, if you had to write for A1 or if you had to write for sports back then, hard deadline was like 10. And it's like, well, wait, the game ain't over. How are we gonna? So it's like, okay, but nobody cared about that. It was like, look, we have a space here, and if you don't fill it, we're gonna have a blank spot in the paper. So you got to give us something. That was as intense as it gets to me, because now, it's post game and we got to run to the bus and, for the Saints, and, I got to have my stuff in before we take off because, I want to get it in so we can get it up as soon as possible. So from the bus ride from the stadium to the plane to the 20, 30 minutes before we take off, it's like, okay, I got to have in a couple of things and I got to get them in like right now. But it's nothing near a Monday night. I used to hate Monday night games and Thursday night games, and even now I still hate night games in the NFL.
Yeah.
But I hated them, absolutely hated them because of deadlines. But we had to do it, and it was like, and after a while you got numb to it. So then we were like, and this is a newspaper joke. So when the news side does elections, and they have election returns and they're in later. And they're like serving pizza and stuff and, cheering and stuff, kind of, hey, we got it. We made that line. And we're like, well, hold on. If we did that in sports, we'd be we'd be the fattest people in the building because we hit deadline. We do this every day. So what are you guys over there cheering about? What are you're over there toasting and, hey, we had a deadline. It's like, wait, we do this every day in sports. So, it's one of those things. But, it's not nearly that intense now. It's kind of, sort of, but not nearly anything like that.
I got a perfect one for you. Because I've seen you sometimes you come to the radio studio for a West Coast game. And those are hard because we'll get done like, 11:30, 12 or 1 or something of that nature. So how about this week? I'll just show up to your house at like 2 or 3 o'clock. You wake up and go start writing. Just give me something. Let's just see if we can get while you're half asleep or something. Writers in the lab. JD, as always, man, appreciate the time.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
All right, Jim, as always, we appreciate JD's time. When you take a look at Dyson coming up in the next season, it's true. He brings up a very good point, too, when you look at, is he going to be able to play, in Summer League or things of that nature. So, but we'll see what happens moving forward for him.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be a situation, as is the case with a bunch of other young players on this team, where you're looking forward to them making another step. I believe a couple times Dyson referenced towards the end of the season in interviews this season that he thought he made progress, but he wants to make a bigger jump next year. So that's what we're going to be watching. I mean, he's going to be participating in the Olympics as well for Australia. So I'll be curious to see how he does there. I thought, too, his summer league last year was really good. I thought he showed a bunch of different things, but now it's about carrying over some of the excellent play that he had in summer league against tougher competition and things like that, and carrying over some of the offensive strides that he's made. It's definitely still the jumper is really the main thing that he has to keep getting better at.
Let's see that as well. Hey, one final thing I want to ask you, because I know we touched on the lottery earlier, right afterwards when it happened with Atlanta winning, but how did it impact, do you think? What else do you want to kind of hit on?
Yeah, I think it definitely has been positive. In 2019, just to kind of give people a little background, if you haven't followed this that closely, 2019 they flattened the odds to make it so that the teams at the top of the lottery, i.e. the teams that have the worst record in the NBA, their percentage chance of getting the number 1 pick has decreased. So I think part of what they were aiming at when they did that was to disincentivize losing, to make it so that there wasn't as much of motivation for teams to just be terrible and stockpile, top 2, top 3 picks. And I think it's really been pretty effective if you think about it. I feel like these extended, protracted, year after year stretches of teams being bad has decreased. And really, I mean, not to pick on them, but if you look at the Detroit Pistons, they've been one of the worst teams in the last couple of years. consecutively, but it's not because they were trying to be terrible. They wanted to be more competitive. They wanted to improve. And if you think about it too, if you have the worst record in the league the way that they have, but you've also picked fifth 2 years in a row, you're not going to go into a season saying like the solution to our troubles is to just be bad and just get the number one pick. You just can't do that. You can't guarantee that you're going to be able to pick in the top part of the draft anymore, because the way that they've done the odds, it's made it such that, I mean, I think it used to be 20%. It used to be a 20% chance that the number one pick is going to go to the team that has the worst record, and now it's only 14. Mm-hmm. So that's a pretty big difference. And there's been a lot of years lately where we've seen the team that ends up with the number one pick not be a team that is one of the worst records in the league. In fact, the very first year of this format, the Pelicans were a 35 win team, and they ended up with the number one pick and got Zion Williamson. So I like the effect that it's had. I think it's definitely, to some extent, made it so teams don't just say, let's just tank our way into being relevant and through this rebuilding process. Because as we've seen, if you try to do that, not that I'm accusing anyone of doing that, but if you try to do that, it doesn't work, because a lot of times you end up with, the third worst record in the league, but then you end up picking seventh in the draft. So it's not really effective.
Well, look at it this way too. Just you add the way they've done it to where the play-in, now the in-season tournament, every game matters. Every single one. One game is the difference between seeding, play-in, play-not. The in-season tournament mattered. And I also love the fact that you have, and they still might even tinker to make it even more important to it, but they made it to where literally the final Sunday of the season, Jim, was for the number one seed in the Western Conference for play-in players. I mean, you name it. They've done a good job of making it more important.
For sure. I think there's definitely been progress made that's undeniable. I think there's still a little bit further to go. I mean, I think the number one solution that a lot of people have is, can you reduce the season from 82 games to less than that? I don't think that's going to happen. So within the confines and the construct of an 82-game schedule, there's certain things that they've done that have improved that. And I don't think any one thing or any one change is really going to be the thing that solves it. But when you add all this stuff together, like you mentioned, the play-in tournament, the in-season tournament, the way that they flatten the odds in the lottery, I think it definitely has helped. And I've seen a big difference, or a notable difference, I think, between 2024 regular season and even, say, 3 or 4 years ago, before they implemented a lot of this stuff.
Jim Eichenhofer, give a follow at Jim_Eichenhofer, and of course, NewOrleansPelicans.com, and you should be reading each and every profile. And they haven't, it's on the entire team. Well, 11 players that played 1,000 minutes or more, and there's a podcast that accompanies them as well. So if you're just catching this, like, what about this guy or that guy? Well, we have them all, I promise. At least 11 of them. So there you go. Thank you as always. Appreciate you for listening to the New Orleans Pelicans podcast.
Thanks for listening to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast. Join us 3 times per week on Pelicans.com, the Pelicans mobile app, the iHeartRadio app, or where you get your podcasts. And be sure to give Jim and Gus a follow on X at Jim_Eichenhofer and GCat_17. We'll see you next time, right here on the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast.